By Tuesday, we should see the heavy snow move into the northern Midwest, and eventually we're going to see this low pressure system gradually intensify once it encounters more of an unstable environment in the midsection of the country. Take a look at what the European model is stating at this time. The forecast is pretty much certain that a lot of these areas in the northern Midwest should experience over a foot of snow. We see that the snow begins to move in by the midday on Tuesday and then moving even more forward. We see that by very early Wednesday, we see the snow move into Wisconsin, into Minnesota, but it's mostly light to moderate snow. This is far from the worst that you're going to experience with this storm system. And moving forward, like I've been saying over the past several days, this unstable environment is going to create a highly convective environment for an area of snow to expand, to become very elongated, as well as very powerful, to a point where we're going to see heavy snow bands develop as a result of this instability. And moving forward, we see that the snow really begins to develop by the midday to later time on Wednesday, where we do see heavy snowfall throughout the Rocky Mountains, so Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and the higher elevations of Arizona and New Mexico need to be at least aware of the possibility of heavy snowfall if you're in the higher elevation. So make sure to pay close attention to that. And moving forward into the Thursday timeframe, we see the snow eventually move into Wisconsin, Michigan, and this snow could be heavy at times. We see the darker shades of blue, and like I said, the forecast is very certain at this time. And I want you to look a little bit further southward. Look at how large that area of pink is. There is a high possibility a lot of these areas will experience over a tenth of an inch of ice, which is enough to cause some havoc on the road. So if you're anywhere between Detroit, the border of Pennsylvania, and upstate New York, as well as just north of Chicago into the Milwaukee area, you need to be aware that snow might not be the only threat you're going to experience from this storm system. There is a high probability of ice because we're seeing a strong amount of convergence between this northeasterly flow and the southwesterly flow. And when we see northeasterly flow and southwesterly flow converge in a very convective environment, that enhances the possibility of a freezing rain threat. And that's exactly what we're seeing right here in the Midwest, where we're not only seeing heavy snow but also a very potent ice threat throughout the Midwest. And moving forward, we see that the snow will eventually become heavier in Minneapolis, where Minneapolis could experience over 2 feet of snow, and this would be considered historic. That would be considered historic territory for the Minneapolis area. The all-time snowstorm record when it comes to total snowfall for Minneapolis is 28 inches, while the forecast right now is leaning more towards 18 to 24 inches. That's still within the top 5 category when it comes to snowstorms. So this will be a historic snowstorm for many of those in southern Minnesota, a large portion of northern Wisconsin as well. This will be a snowstorm that you likely won't experience for years, and you could almost consider it a once in a lifetime type snowstorm, as this storm will be very significant. Like I've been saying, the instability and how elongated this storm is will create a long duration event, and combined with the heavy snowfall we're going to see associated with some of these snow bands, this snowstorm should go into record territory for many areas in the northern Midwest. And moving forward, we see that the storm even going into midday Thursday. Keep in mind, the storm started as early as late Tuesday, so this will be this snowfall threat will be over a 24-hour event, and we should see the heaviest snowfall, I'd say, during the early time on Thursday, once the center of circulation comes the closest to Minneapolis, before eventually it should move out by the later Thursday timeframe. But just keep in mind for those isolated snow showers on the backside of the storm system. And moving our focus further eastward, we see that the northeast should get involved with the snowfall very early on Thursday. Like I said in my previous video, anywhere that's just north of the Interstate 84 corridor, which extends from Boston all the way west towards Scranton, that's where you should expect the most snowfall from this storm system, or that's where you should expect the storm to be more of a snow event rather than a rain event. If you're south of the Interstate 84 corridor, which, like I said, extends from Boston, moves to Hartford, and eventually it goes west into Scranton, then it's more likely going to be a rain event for those areas south of the Interstate 84 corridor. So throughout much of the interior Northeast, you should expect a heavy snowfall threat, and this will include the bigger population centers of the Northeast as well. Boston should get involved with potentially up to 6 to 12 inches of snow. It's going to be a very close forecast. Right now, Boston is right on the border between experiencing 3 to 6 to 6 to 12 inches of snow, so you should expect any range of right around 6 inches of snow for the Boston area, and Providence will get involved with some snowfall. It's going to be a close forecast for Hartford as well. I'd say the forecast for Hartford right now is 1 to 3 inches, but it could easily be more or less depending on where exactly that rain snow line will build. But expect 1 to 3 inches for the most part around Hartford. And then Albany, you could potentially see 3 to 6 inches of snow from this storm system before eventually we're going to see more of a mixing in a lot of these areas, because the low pressure system will of course move a little bit closer, and that'll enhance the southerly winds, which will of course raise the temperature as the low pressure system moves eastward. But you still should expect a very powerful snowstorm for much of the interior Northeast. What's interesting is that the European model sort of wants to segregate these two areas of snow based on the latest run, and it wants to weaken the storm a little bit more than anticipated. But we still see heavy snowfall throughout the interior Northeast, so that's going to be something to keep in mind. The forecast is very certain, so in the areas where you're expected to receive snowfall, you should expect snowfall. And then you're probably wondering what will happen beyond this point. What will happen, let's say, beyond Friday once this storm system eventually moves out of the United States? We were talking about the possibility of a second snowstorm as we approach a weekend, but that threat seems to be quickly subsiding because the European model doesn't expect enough instability to develop right behind the low pressure system, or as much as anticipated, because you see that as this low pressure system moves further eastward, there's not going to be any sort of major amount of cold air behind it to really fuel the convective activity surrounding the center of circulation. We see the jet stream is very straightened out behind this low pressure system, and that's not really going to create an unstable environment or a very convective environment when we see the jet stream straightened out like this. And the European model eventually does expect the instability to enhance, but by that point it's going to be well off the coast of the Northeast. And not only that, it won't necessarily be enough convection to bring any sort of major snowfall, maybe a couple of snow showers in New England, but that's it. There's still time for the forecast to change. We're going around 5 days out at this time, but it seems like the computer models are subsiding away from the fact that we're going to see a second snowstorm move, or at least a second major snowstorm move into the Northeast by this weekend. At least that's what the European model is stating. The GFS model is showing a different scenario where it wants to bring a snowstorm pattern to the Northeast, which is very interesting. But as of right now, it seems like the European model is subsiding less than on the idea that we're going to see a major snowstorm in the Northeast by this weekend, but it's at least something to be aware of. I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days. Now let me show you guys what the GFS model is stating. The GFS model, at least for this first snowstorm, is showing a very similar scenario. It's pretty, like I said, it's pretty much certain that this first snowstorm will dump around the general forecasts that what the computer models are stating when it comes to snowfall accumulation, as it seems likely that this will be the general trajectory and the general snowfall accumulation with this storm. And moving forward beyond that point, we still see the GFS model does want to bring somewhat of a snowstorm to the northern Midwest, but it's very weak. But you see after this weekend, that's when the GFS model wants to bring a snowstorm pattern to the Northeast, where we see not only one but two snowstorms move into the Northeast by next week. So there's still a high amount of uncertainty with this, especially since the GFS model is going completely against what the European model is stating. So I would take it with a huge grain of salt, especially since the European model been the more reliable model this winter, but it's at least something to be aware of for Northeast by next week, but I wouldn't hold your breath on these snowstorms coming for fruition just yet because there's still a lot of time to iron out the forecast. But like I've been saying, prepare for this major snowstorm that's expected to move through as early as tomorrow. This is what the European model is forecasting when it comes to snowfall over the next 6 days. We do see that a large area of the northern Midwest and the northern Northeast should expect 6 to 12 inches of snow. This includes bigger cities like Boston, Albany, Minneapolis could experience over a foot of snow, will likely experience over a foot of snow, I'd say, and you could easily experience 2 feet of snow, which would be close to record-breaking territory. And then Green Bay as well could expect potentially close to 2 feet of snow. And we see that Milwaukee, it's going to be a close forecast for you guys. And then anywhere that's right up along the rain snow line, watch out for the possibility of ice. The European model, at least snowfall forecast, does not really show it on this map, the ice accumulation, but I assure you that the ice accumulation certainly does, the ice threat certainly does exist just south of this rain snow line we see right here. So Chicago maybe could get involved with some freezing rain. So as Detroit and the northern portions of Pennsylvania and the southern portions of upstate New York could get involved as well. So at least be aware of that possibility, because remember, all it takes is just 1/10 of an inch of ice to cause major problems on the road. So make sure to be prepared for that possibility as you approach the midweek. The GFS model is showing a very similar forecast, pretty much almost the exact same forecast that the European model is predicting at this point. So make sure in the areas where you're expecting to receive snowfall, make sure to prepare as if a major snowstorm is headed your way, because it is likely at this point. So there's the other threat you need to pay close attention to in the Northeast and the northern Midwest, which is, of course, this ice accumulation as a result of this freezing rain. We do see that a large area of central Michigan could experience up to 1/2 of an inch of ice, and we even see over 1/2 of an inch of ice right in the middle, the south central portion of Michigan. So this would definitely cause major impacts. I emphasize to prepare for the possibility of power outages, tree limbs coming down as a result of the weight of that ice pushing down on the branches, as well as, of course, very dangerous road conditions. And then we could even see that ice threat move further eastward into the Northeast, where a large portion of upstate New York and northern Pennsylvania could get involved with up to 1/4 of an inch of ice. And this extends into Milwaukee as well, and the suburbs of Chicago, where you could experience some ice accumulation. And don't be surprised if we see the ice accumulation, at least the heaviest, move a little bit further northward or southward, depending on where that rain snow line is. So while the central portion of Chicago may not be at least in the threat of receiving freezing rain, you keep in mind you're certainly still you easily could experience heavy freezing rain threat, depending on the small variations we see with where exactly the rain snow line will build. So make sure to be aware of that possibility in Chicago as you approach the midweek. So here's a snowfall accumulation forecast. It's almost the exact same as yesterday's forecast. There hasn't been many variations between the two computer models over the past 24 hours. So in a large area of southern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and Michigan, you should expect over a foot of snow. And this could be one of the worst snowstorms you've experienced in your lifetime in a lot of these areas. So you want to make sure to take the right precautions. Worst of the snow, I'd say, should be very early on Thursday, but you guys could experience the snow as early as Wednesday morning. So you want to pay very close attention to that. And then also in the interior Northeast, you could expect potentially over a foot of snow. And Boston, 3 to 6 inches you should expect. And then even as far south as Hartford, you could expect maybe close to 3 inches of snow. So make sure to pay close attention to this throughout the northern Midwest and Northeast, because this will be a very significant winter storm. But I thank you guys for watching.